Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Government measures to respond to surging oil prices are now being rolled out as volatility in global energy markets continue. President Lee Jae Myung on Thursday chaired an emergency economic inspection meeting reviewing risks from the Middle East supply shock and discussing response measures. Concerns have also emerged here at home about a possible crude supply crunch in April, though the government says Korea's reserve rank among the largest in the world. To stabilize domestic fuel prices, the government has introduced a fuel price cap for the first time in 29 years and expanded fuel tax cuts. But with uncertainty surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, a key global oil route, and inflation risks rising, questions remain over whether these measures will be enough to cushion the impact. To discuss the situation and the policy options ahead, we are joined in the studio by Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. A big welcome, Professor Yang.
Happy to be here.
And also joining us online is Song Soo-young, professor of business and economics at Chungang University. Good to see you, Professor Song.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So let's start a discussion first with Professor Yang. So like I've said yesterday, President Lee Jae Myung chaired an emergency meeting and discussed ways to respond to this current crisis. How would you assess the current impact and the recent oil price volatility on the Korean economy?
Okay, well, obviously, oil, gasoline, and diesel fuel prices have increased significantly. And also, there is some concerns about possible shortages in the future. Apparently, there are consumers who face shortages in things like some oil products, trash bags, which are made from vinyl. But right now, the shortages seems to be because of heightened demand. That is, people are afraid that prices are going to go up even further in the future. So they're increasing their demand to stock up. And that seems to be what's causing the shortages rather than the actual cut in supply itself. But those reduction in supply, I think, are coming, especially if the war continues at this pace. But right now, it seems to be more of a fear response rather than a actual supply response. But I think there's a good reason to believe that we will get reduction of supply in oil-related products like vinyl, and also products which are coming out of the Middle East, possibly helium that's needed for semiconductors. So we do have to be prepared.
Right. So the fear coming from the current uncertain situation is definitely raising the supply shock here. Now, in the country, there are growing concerns about a possible crude oil supply shortage in April. And the government says its strategic reserves ranked 6th in the world and is trying to calm those fears. What's your outlook, Professor Song?
Yeah, I believe that, as Professor Young has mentioned, that we have encountered this kind of oil shortage due to the cutoff of the Strait of Hormuz, and actually we depend on 70% of crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and also more than 20% of the LNG. Actually, LNG is used for production of the electricity, and considering the energy mix of South Korea, we do not depend much on the oil for the production of electricity. But however, we depend on very much on the natural gas. So that's why the government and the President Lee has requested people to save not only the electricity and also the consumption of the petroleum or diesel for the transportation is reduced. And considering that situation, the crude oil reserve, actually 190 million barrels oil reserves are available, but at least this may not last longer than 2 months. The reason is because we depend upon the petrochemical has been produced and used to make some plastic export to the other countries. So also we need some kind of the refrain from the exporting of the petrochemicals to outside Korea. So that's why this could be a really serious problem for the growth rate of the economy. So that's why we face this kind of several the steps for the government to adopt to reduce the consumption of oil-related products.
So it's really a concerning situation right now. But when we look at the root causes of this current situation, Iran, excuse me, it has partially eased restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz, allowing limited passage for non-hostile vessels. What kind of impact do you think this would have on the global energy markets?
Well, if they truly decide to let ships go through, and their condition right now seems to be, as you said, non-hostile, it does not contain oil that will be delivered to American-related firms, and there might be a passage fee of about $2 million per boat. Obviously, no one wants to pay $2 million for a ship to go through, but it might be a second best solution because it will at least let the oil go through. But there's another consideration here. Will President Trump allow it? Because obviously he wants to win against Iran, so he wants to cut off sources of their funding. So that's another wild card that is coming through here. But as far as Korea is concerned, Korea has asked the Iran embassy to let Korean ships go through, and Iran has asked for lists of Korean ships that are trapped in the Strait of Hormuz. But right now, the stumbling block seems to be first, they have to get approval from the political side of Iran as well as the military side of Iran, and there seems to be some problems in coordination. And secondly, some of these Korean ships contain oil that are destined for firms which are affiliated with the United States, so that might be a barrier.
The political factor could also weigh in. Now, as for South Korea, as part of efforts to stabilize domestic fuel prices, the government introduced a gasoline price cap for the first time in 29 years. In about 2 weeks, fuel prices have fallen roughly 4 to 5%. Professor Song, would you say the policy's effectiveness has already been proven, or could this just be a temporary effect?
Regardless of whether it is effective or not, I believe that this situation is emergent situation is under the similar to the war situation. Therefore, we need some actually the ration of even the distribution of oil to the people. So, considering the effect of the price cap, it has requested some refinery and the oil suppliers to reduce the price around the 1,754 ones in the 10 days ago. Then the second price cap has been increased to the level of 19 and 23 ones. So, which is like 30 for one and 19.23 for diesel. So this implies that there is clearly, because of due to the shortage and the uncertainty about oil supply from through the Hormuz Strait and from Middle East. Therefore, there is some control is necessary, but the government is in the balancing act. Not only set up the price cap and allow the price to fluctuate within lower than or equal to the price cap, and also prevent some oil companies from the price gouging and extracting too much profit out of this emergency situation. So therefore, even though it does not, it should have an effect to control the price, or if necessary, the necessary step would be just a ration, determine some allocation of distribution of oil should be restricted and controlled. Even very severe cases such as the Iran and the U.S. war has been prolonged longer than April 9th.
Now, if we stay with the government's response, it has raised fuel price cap by more than 200 won per liter, and pump prices still expected to enter the 2,000 won range. Professor Young, do you think this latest measure is enough?
Well, I agree somewhat with Professor Song. I think there should be some limits on distribution because if the war lasts an extended period of time, we need to try to maintain our reserves and draw down as slowly as possible. But if we keep the prices relatively low, then obviously people will not save try to save gasoline, so that reserves will be drawn down faster. Has the price increase worked? I think it's sort of in worst of both cases. The WTI, the West Texas Intermediate oil, has gone up by 50% or so. The Brent oil has gone up by 50% or so. Dubai oil has gone up by about 100%. The price cap has risen this week by about 210 won, but that is not similar to the percentages of oil prices that have gone up in the global market. So the price is not really being reflected in the consumer prices, and that means there's a possibility that consumers will use more gas than perhaps is warranted, and that means we'll draw down our reserves faster. This may make sense if we are guaranteed a source of oil, even if the war continues for a long time. But right now, I'm not sure if we have that continual source, which means that we need to try to save the reserves, and that means we probably should let the prices go up even more.
Now, as part of a follow-up measure to this higher price cap, the government has also expanded the fuel tax cut. Professor Song, how effective do you think this step would be, and what additional policy responses would actually be needed if high oil prices continue?
Yeah, the fuel tax cut actually offered to put the pressure on the price of the oil and keep the price at the low level. The primary reason why you need this kind of measures to price cap, such as the price cap and this kind of the tax cut for the fuel tax. The reason is because we need some balancing act. Because if the oil price goes up and too much, according to the percentage increase as the Brent and Western Texas Intermediate for the 100% increase or such thing occurs, then clearly the consumption of oil is reduced because of the higher price. But it does have a very negative effect on the industry and our economy. So the government, the reason why the government would like to not only set the price cap as well as also some kind of offering the lower fuel tax is to keep the balancing between some declining economic growth rate as well as, and also to keep the economy to go on and the consumption should be refrained and also keep the industry working. Because in the case, if the war has been resolved and the truce or some armistice has been achieved between Iran and the U.S., and we need to keep the economy going up and ramp up the economy. So that is why we need this kind of some opposing direction of steps are employed to keep the price within some range. And so that is the primary reason why we have such steps.
So beyond this, there could be broader policy tools it would be necessary moving forward. And speaking of those kinds of efforts, Professor Young, authorities also reinstated the public sector vehicle rotation system for the first time in 15 years. Would you think this would expand a demand control policy to the private sector be actually effective?
Well, in the past, if you had the support of the public, it was effective. If you did not, then it was just something that people just try to get around. So they would drive anyway, but park in a place that wasn't enforced and so on. So it would really depend on how seriously the public took it, which is one of the reasons why I think a higher price may be necessary if we want to reduce demand. But perhaps a better way to deal with this problem, and I think government has started to introduce some of these policies yesterday, is to try to move people from driving to mass transportation. So make mass transportation easier to use, increase the number of buses, increase the number of subway cars that are coming during the day, because this was the main reason why people do not like mass transit. So increase the number of subway cars that are coming in per hour, and increase the number of buses. Try to get people to use mass transit instead of driving their own cars. That would be the, I think, better way of dealing with it than this rationing system for automobile parking.
So raising convenience for people to use the public transportation system would also be very helpful. Now, the government is also moving quickly to pass what it calls a 25 trillion won war supplementary budget. Professor Song, do you think that will be enough to cushion the economic shock?
I don't think it would be enough, but anyway, the supplementary budget of 25 trillion won is a really necessary step to keep the economy and our Korean economy to maintain the current status. And the reason this would be necessary to be used for the cash vouchers to the consumers, and particularly for the support for the companies who may suffer from the shortage of the petrochemicals and the petroleums and the other necessary, such as naphtha. And therefore, this is this kind of supplementary budget is used for keep the economy going and stop the economy from falling into some contraction. So that is, as I mentioned earlier, this is this kind of budget is necessary to keep the economy alive, and also deliver some confidence among the people, because people may feel very contracted because of some uncertainty, and if there is the fear, or the people are frightened, and then when they reduce the consumption too much, then actually that drives the economy, dragging the economy into some recession and unnecessary recession. So this is a very delicate position, and for the government to maneuver this kind of critical situation. So in one way, they ask the people from consuming some to extravagant consumption of the oil. On the other hand, they would like to keep the people's consumption level at a certain level. So too much fluctuation of the consumption and economic behavior is not good at all for the economy. So that's why this kind of a supplementary budget is necessary. But I cannot say it is enough or not. Maybe if the war continued, we need a further supplementary budget. But otherwise, then we may just stop using the supplementary budget for the time being.
Definitely. So it all really depends on the duration of the war itself.
Yeah.
Now, as our Professor Song has just touched upon, now the oil prices, it's really raising concerns about inflation in the country. Professor Yang, do you think the Bank of Korea should start considering an interest rate hike, for this year?
Probably, but it really depends on the duration of the war, and depending on how the war proceeds, we might be in a case where we need a rate cut. If the war ends relatively quickly, then we will have inflation, but not an economic slowdown or a recession. That will probably require a rate increase. I would argue that Korea needed a rate increase anyway, because there has been some signs that perhaps the stock market went up too quickly. There's too much liquidity in the system. So right now, I think there is a higher case to be made for a rate increase. But if the war continues, if we see a lot of shortages as we fear, then the economy may go into recession and we would have a stagflation where we would have to choose between dealing with inflation and dealing with recession. They require opposite prescription. And if the economic slowdown part is serious enough, then we may have to reduce rates rather than increase it and just settle for a higher inflation. But I think right now it's much too early to speculate. But if the war, say, ends within the next week, then we will probably have to raise rates.
Right, so we'll all hope for the situation in the Middle East to conclude as soon as possible. But as for now, we'll have to leave our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Yang.
Thank you.
And of course, Professor Song, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.